Good afternoon, Team Rhino. I hope you're enjoying Cinco de Rhino so far, and there's many events coming up throughout the day, so definitely check that out at rhinos.org/Cinco. We have a very special guest with us today. She is the new head ranger at Kruger National Park in South Africa, Cathy Dreyer. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, Chris, and welcome to everybody that's listening. Thank you very much. It still sounds very, very new when you say the new head ranger at Kruger. I'm officially starting in a week, so very excited. Obviously, a very, very challenging position, but for the most part, very, very excited to be moving back to Kruger, should I say.
Yes, we were very excited to hear the news. We're very happy for you, and it couldn't happen to a better person for rhinos as well. So I wonder if you'll give our listeners a little bit of a background. You have just an extensive background in conservation, especially with black rhinos.
Yeah, so I studied conservation. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I left school, but I always knew that I wanted to do something that was outdoors, something to do with wildlife, and something very practical. So something where I could get stuck in and use my hands and get dirty. And so I studied conservation. And in South Africa, part of your conservation training is to do a year's practical training. And I was born and raised in Cape Town. And when I had the opportunity to do a year's training, I decided to sort of look on a map and pick somewhere far away from Cape Town. There was not enough wildlife in Cape Town to keep me happy and busy. So I actually ended up coming to Addo over 21 years ago as just a normal student. And that's where I sort of met my first black rhino. It was a stage where Addo was Boma training a lot of black rhino and sort of moving the Michaelis out of Addo and bringing in the sort of historic subspecies that would have naturally occur here, which was the bicornus. So I got to spend a lot of time Boma training black rhino, and I very quickly realized that if I made them love me more than anybody else, I got to go with them wherever they needed to go all across the world. So I was very fortunate to travel all over Africa and take rhino back to Tanzania and Malawi and Botswana. And I think once that sort of bug bit, it stayed with me, and I joined the Sandparks Veterinary Wildlife Services unit, which is a specialized unit within Sandparks that just deals with wildlife capture and relocation. And again, it was sort of, I was going to join them for a year or two just so that I could do more work with black rhino, and I ended up staying for 13 years. I stayed with that team for 13 years, traveling all over, catching animals, but always sort of going back to black rhino and working with black rhino. Until I sort of decided that I needed to grow up and live in one place. And I took up a management position in Great Fish River Nature Reserve, which had a key one black rhino population, and did their conservation management and law enforcement. And I stayed there for about 5 years before I was asked to go back to Kruger to sort of set up surveillance and monitoring programs for black rhino in Kruger. I did that for about 3 years and then took up a position here in Addo. And I must say, I had big plans, and I thought, again, I was going to grow up and settle and stay in one place. But here I am less than 2 years later, moving back to Kruger for probably one of the most challenging positions of my career to date. And that is being the head ranger and leading the ranger services within Kruger National Park. So that will officially be where I will reside from sort of next week onwards.
That is a wonderful background, and they call you the Rhino Whisperer. So why do you think you earned that nickname?
So I think it definitely comes from Boma training rhinos. So obviously in Boma training, you have to get them really habituated and tame and used to you. I think some of the longest trips that I've done with rhino, either by plane or by road, have been in excess of 2 days, where you are keeping a rhino in a confined, very small box and space. So they need to be very habituated and used to you, so that you can literally give them water by hand and you can feed them by hand. And I found the best way to take a completely wild rhino and tame it down was just to either read, talk to it, play music. So it just got so used to your voice. And I think I sort of got the name because I was constantly talking to the rhino when they were in the bomas and making everybody else talk to them. So they were never surprised by just people arriving. They were sort of really used to voices and human voices. And I think it's a name that stuck with me from my student days. And yeah, it just hasn't gone away. That's sort of how everybody knows me.
I think it's a wonderful, wonderful nickname, and it's so great that you've found a way to keep that rhino calm during those trips. It's not an easy situation to confine a rhino for that long a period of time, transferring them. So it's wonderful that you came up with a system, and it's an apt nickname for you. As you know, Kruger is a very, very special place for many reasons. For rhinos, it's, you know, one of the largest populations, if not the largest population of rhinos in one place. It has both white and black rhinos. A lot of challenges ahead of you. What are your thoughts on taking on this position, and you know, what's your vision for the population in Kruger?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, the challenges are obviously very daunting, and they are massive challenges. Just, I think the sheer size of Kruger in itself, being 2 million hectares, you know, the size of a small country like Israel or Wales, already just makes the management of such a big area very, very complex. It stretches across different international boundaries, across different provincial boundaries within South Africa. So I think that's in itself is something that you really need to get your head around. And the issues range. You know, we sort of focus a lot on the rhino poaching, and obviously the rhino poaching is one of the more serious issues. But there are also a lot of other issues related to wildlife crime across Kruger, whether it's snaring or bushmeat or the poisoning of carnivores or vultures. I think that the challenges are not just confined to rhino. Um, I think for me, the biggest challenge is going to be how to sort of find that balance between having the field rangers or the rangers having to just constantly focus on law enforcement, because that is the biggest threat. Um, but there is still a lot of other conservation management objectives that need to be fulfilled. So trying to find that balance between law enforcement and conservation is going to be really hard and really tricky. I think that there has been a lot of work done to date on the well-being for rangers, and I think we have all realized that ranger well-being, specifically in a place like Kruger, where the rangers have been under a tremendous amount of stress and pressure, not just recently, but 12 years into fighting what is essentially a war. So ranger well-being is very important to me, and making sure that we look after the people that are looking after our rhino and all our wildlife assets. So I think that is probably going to be a lot of my focus. I think I need to get my head around the magnitude of Kruger, and obviously, you know, I think the biggest comfort is I'm not starting from scratch. I'm certainly not reinventing the wheel. They are incredible people, and there are a lot of amazing departments, not only in ranger services, but also in conservation that stretch across Kruger. I'm taking over from Mr. Ken Maggs, who's been there for 40 years and who has put a lot of things already in place. So I think that's a massive comfort, is that I'm not going to go and fight this on my own. There's a lot of dedicated and passionate and committed people. So I think for the most part, I'm just really excited to be able to be part of that team.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful, and rangers are definitely on the front line of rhino poaching and wildlife crime in general. So it's good to hear that there are some well-being programs in place, and that's one of the areas that you plan to concentrate on. We love what they do, and they work so hard, and they've been under, as you said, a lot of pressure in Kruger.
Yeah, and I think it is something that the IRF has invested in and has helped, whether it is legal training or just overall well-being or just morale building and assisting, as was done here in Addo, with just getting the basics right, just making sure that the rangers have the absolute basic equipment to be able to do the really difficult job that they do. So I think luckily there is a very good understanding of what is needed from the rangers in terms of well-being.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that too. Because I think most people, when they think ranger, they think somebody out there patrolling and protecting, and that is a big part of their job. But they also have to collect crime scene evidence. They have to secure a crime scene. They must testify in court. So there's a lot of different activities that they have to go through as part of that legal process. It's great that we're going to work together to help them throughout every part of that process so that they can do their jobs and go home at night and feel like they've both accomplished something, but can also go home and rest easy and not have as much
Yeah,
stress.
for sure. And I
Yeah.
think also what's really important is that we tend to focus a lot on the negativity. So the bad rangers, the corrupt rangers, all the rhino that have been lost, and we sort of lose focus on the really good rangers, the honest ones who are still out there every single day fighting. And without them, there probably would be no rhino left to try and protect and save. So I think it's also important that we focus on the good ones and not just always focus on the negativity. It's very easy to get caught up on the negative and another rhino poached. And we kind of lose sight on all the positive work that's been done to date.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Um, So Kruger had some successes last year. Poaching did decline in the park. A lot of that is an assist to COVID, which is terrible in other ways, but did have that one positive as borders were closed, borders were tight, and it was harder to get rhino horn out. Um, how can you build on that success of this year? And then, of course, the negative numbers came out at the beginning of the year that there has been a significant decline in white and black rhino populations in Kruger over the last 10 years. What are your thoughts on how you can build on some of the successes you saw with declines in poaching, and Addo had a lot of success, obviously, under your watch in this past year, as well as how can we tip those scales and start to build population growth again.
Yeah, so I think what COVID really did assist us with was highlighted obviously where the weaknesses were. And one thing, like you said, without those, not only the international borders being closed, we went through a period where just our normal provincial borders between provinces were closed and transport was really restricted. It was sort of really in your face where the problems are and where the issues were, just with access into the parks, without people having those. We have an idea that poachers climb over a fence or walk into the park, but a lot do gain access by a vehicle and drop-offs and that sort of thing. So I think it definitely did highlight where a lot of the issues were and where the strengths for the poachers were in terms of transport and having those means to get the horn out of the country. And we certainly have taken note of that and built on that. I'm glad you said that there has been a decline in the rhino in Kruger for 10 years, because again, it's been in the media quite often that the rhino numbers have been declining, and it may not all be linked to poaching. Certainly a massive amount of it has been linked. But I think the important thing is that we have taken note of it, and places like Kruger, not only Kruger Sands Parks as a whole, has realized that it's time to rethink, which is why they are currently busy with a turnaround plan and a rhino implementation plan to look at these various ways at sort of what has been done, what has worked, what has not worked, and what more can be done. So to answer you, that is exactly the process where we are at the moment, is to strategize, to meet with different role players, not only sandparks, but people that have been involved from the very beginning, and just look at what's being done and what needs to change. And hopefully to come out with a strategy that will strengthen protecting the rhino, specifically in places like Kruger. Which again is really made a lot more complicated just by the sheer size and the magnitude. And even harder that we are all still suffering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been fortunate in that there has been a lot of COVID relief funding, and Addo has been a recipient of that from the IRF, which has really carried us through some very, very tough times. But we are still in those tough times. And as much as we would like to think that we have unlimited resources, we're going to have to strategize and make all these plans while we are still sort of in the midst of a pandemic, and still really start thinking of finding innovative ways of how to get things done with limited funds. So all I can say is hopefully when you chat to me again, we'll have some new ideas, some new plans, there'll be some new thinking involved. But what I can say is that it's really encouraging to see how many people are getting together and how many people absolutely want to turn the tide and want to make a difference. It's really not for a lack of having will to improve things.
That's important to say, that there is that will in South Africa, that wildlife is a treasure, and Cathy, you're one of the biggest voices for that, and so we thank you for that. And it's good to hear that there are some plans and some strategies coming together, and we know that you're going to be new in the position and it's going to take you some time, but we're excited to see what you can implement going forward. So if you looked into your crystal ball, what would you see in the future for South Africa and rhinos?
Well, I think the world has taken note. I mean, South Africa has taken note a long time ago. We are very well aware of the rhino crisis, and as a country who are very proud of our heritage and very proud of our wildlife, and we know how important it is for us, not just from a heritage point of view, but from an economic point of view, what it brings into the parks and how many people, whether it be communities or restaurants or hotels, benefit from that. We certainly want to. I can see that there's a shift, that South Africans are angry, and a lot of that anger is directed at us at the moment, but that's okay. I think it's good that people are angry because it means that people still care. All I can say is that I certainly do see the will to want to change things, and people want to work together. It's by no means an easy task that we have taken on. But I think there definitely are ways that we can turn the tide on this. And I hope in my crystal ball, I'm still in Kruger National Park for a very long time. And then I finally just settle and find my feet. But I think that I definitely will in this position. And I can only hope that we make really meaningful contributions and decisions that benefit Black and white rhino in the long term.
Yeah, and it's important to say that international travel has not completely come back for South Africa. Tourism is a big revenue provider, both for sand parks and for private reserves. So it's important that we, maintain support, continue support for Cathy and others' efforts in protecting rhinos at this time, as a gap for that tourism revenue until it can return and benefit South Africa's economy and its people.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, places like sand parks, we are 80% dependent on tourism revenue and are only 20% government funded. And we always joke in Addo, it was absolutely incredible when the parks closed for almost 4 months. It was amazing I don't think we will ever experience having another period in our lives where places like Kruger and places like Addo were completely devoid of any guests for weeks on end. And we literally had national parks to ourselves, and we got to see how animals' behavior changed. We were seeing a lot more nocturnal animals during the day. We didn't have tar roads because everything was covered in elephant dung because the animals literally took over. It was amazing and wonderful until the funding stopped and until the tourists and the guests weren't there anymore. And then it wasn't so fun anymore. And for a conservationist, we don't always really see, we know the tourism value, but our focus is so much on conservation. But it certainly became real when we started to miss our guests and we didn't have those extra eyes and ears looking out, telling us what was happening in the park. And we certainly are still feeling it. We have very little international guests still visiting our parks. It is hard for South Africans. I think it's hard for everybody now. So yeah, it is still a really, really tough time, which is why we are incredibly grateful for any and all the support that we have received, specifically in the past year that we've come out of.
Well, Cathy, thank you for joining me today. And And we look forward to speaking with you again in the future to see how things are working out in your new position in Kruger. But we want to extend our heartfelt congratulations. We couldn't be happier to continue to work with you at Kruger, and thank you for all the hard work you've done in the past year at Addo as well.
Thanks so much, Christopher. And thank you to you and to everybody else that supports us in our work far and wide. I always say that, we do this for everybody else, and we draw inspiration from people that are so far removed from what we are doing, but are so passionate and so committed and care about our wildlife. So we are the ones that should be saying thank you and all the best to you as well.
Well, the world loves South Africa's wildlife along with you, and we know how much South Africa treasures it as well. So it's our pleasure to be connected with you and partnered with you, and now and into the future. Um, Okay, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this Team Rhino, and check out the rest of the Cinco events going on today. Remember, you can make a donation at rhinos.org. All of the events are posted at rhinos.org/Cinco. So please consider supporting. Your gifts today go to support work like Cathy is doing in Africa, as well as work around the world. So thank you for your donations, and we'll talk to you later.